On to the Independents for Change and Deputy Tommy Broughan. Deputy Broughan, you have 30 minutes, but we're going to have to adjourn the debate at 8 o'clock.
Okay, and I'd like to say that I'm sharing with Deputy Thomas.
Thomas Sprinkle.
Yeah,
yep.
Thomas Sprinkle. Cancora, I warmly welcome this opportunity to speak on this very long-awaited bill. I'd like to acknowledge at the outset, of course, that the Minister made time at the very beginning of his appointment to meet a number of important civic society stakeholders who promote road safety. In particular, he met, I think, Ms Susan Gray, Ms Anne Fogarty and other representatives from that great civil society group, PARC, which is promoting awareness, responsibility and care on our roads. And I'd also like to acknowledge the recent development whereby the Garda Commissioner and Garda Síochána decided to scrap the fees for abstracts and statements for families who have been bereaved by road traffic collisions, which a number of us and indeed the Park organisation are referred to campaigned for many, many years over the last decade. A lot of us, of course, have been waiting for this bill to be brought before the Houses to finally have legislation in place addressing drug driving and to close the loophole which arose when the mutual recognition of disqualified drivers agreement between Ireland and the UK lapsed. I think, I don't know, possibly on 20 or 30 times as question times when I was a transport spokesperson in this House, Cancora, I pleaded with your predecessors to bring forward a model of testing for drugs. You mentioned the three key drugs here this evening in your own speech, and to follow the example of states like Victoria and Australia that embarked on this invigilation of drivers. I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. The question is why it has taken us so long to address this, because I think the safety of people on roads has to be the key. It has to be your key parameter, your key responsibility, Minister. Again, I welcome the fact that finally this bill is in front of us today. And of course, the bill also provides for the reduction of speed limits to include the 20-kilometre zones. And of course, again, we remember the debate we had in this House around Jake's Law and little Jake Brennan, and the tragedy that we tried to come forward with provisions that would ensure the safety of children and vulnerable citizens and older citizens in housing estates. Again, I was on Dublin City Council, I think, for about 12 years, Minister, and many times I called for us to move towards home zones, which were areas in cities which I think the Netherlands piloted, whereby you had very strict low-speed districts of perhaps in that area we were looking for a 25-kilometre-per-hour restriction inside all housing estates. And of course you provided for a number of other amendments to the Road Traffic Acts from 1961. I think it's important to note that it's intended, the purpose of the bill, of course, is to improve road safety and reduce fatalities and serious injuries. We've had a significant improvement in the number of fatalities on our roads down to 2012, Minister, at a low, I think, of 162. Recently, of course, we've seen the worrying trend of numbers increasing, of the numbers of deaths increasing, and all of the incredible tragedy that brings to families and, of course, to the removal of important of citizens from our society, and all of the costs associated with that to communities. And of course, one life lost on our roads is one too many. And distressingly, Minister, as of the 27th of September today, this year, our year-to-year data was shockingly 23 fatalities, higher than last year at 138, compared to 115 at the same time in 2015. And obviously, you now are the person on the deck. You have the responsibility to see how that may be addressed in conjunction with RSA. I think myself that the whole focus of Road Safety Authority campaign should be, or a major focus should be on speeding. I think speeding is the central feature. I know it's important what we're doing today in this bill and what we did before to discourage drink driving and the use of mobile phones and so on. But the speeding seems to be the essential single issue that results in horrendous deaths and casualties. And I think campaigns that RSA, and they do mount some very effective campaigns recently to protect pedestrians, to protect motorcyclists and so on, but that I personally I think the emphasis should be on speeding, and particularly obviously on our roads and the western part of our country from Kerry up to Donegal, has the statistics are pretty shocking for many of the years, and it's something that we have to address. Such high numbers, of course, it's striking with such high numbers that we had reports recently of a judge giving a bachelor farmer from Kerry time to find a woman to drive him around before his driving ban for driving while intoxicated came into effect. These kind of jokey comments about drink driving and about dangerous driving are totally inappropriate, and this culture, I think, has to be changed. I feel myself that the court service has been deficient, as I think I said to you in a previous question time, Minister, in enabling us to collate the information that we need to know, the House needs to know, and you need to know, in order to make our roads safer. We also, I noticed the stand you seem to be taking today on the Judicial Appointments Bill, and I would applaud that stand. I think that that's a direction the House needs to go in, that the best possible people are appointed to the bench and are appointed totally transparently and independently. But some of the things we've heard in district courts are, I think, they're very disrespectful to the ongoing litany of tragedies on our roads. And earlier in the summer, of course, a man whose blood alcohol reading was 198 milligrams per 100. That's almost 4 times over the limit per 1,000, I think, and who had previously pleaded guilty for drunk driving in 2014, was granted an adjournment of his driving ban on December the 8th. Earlier this month, of course, we had a case where a driver who had 9 life bans from driving for having no insurance was jailed for just 5 months and fined given a small fine for breaking the law repeatedly in a most profound way. The bill before us, of course, will provide for the changing of the name of the mandatory alcohol test and the maths checkpoints to the MIT's, the mandatory intoxicant testing, the MIT checkpoints. And figures I have from previous replies to some of the many parliamentary questions I've raised with yourself and your predecessor and the Minister for Justice on the issue show that, of course, there were 78,000 maths in 2014 and 59,000 up to the end of September 2015. But there has been a concern among citizens, obviously, that the number of checkpoints has been decreasing due to the fall in numbers of An Garda Síochána, and in particular the dramatic fall in the numbers of the traffic corps, and the fact that the traffic corps is not, it's not, if you like, given that specific role 24/7 to protect our citizens on our roads. So I think it's important to ensure that for accurate reporting, I think the bill does reflect that. The new MITs indicate how many tests are conducted for only alcohol, only drugs, and both, and including the outcomes and the 3 drugs and the other medicinal drug you refer to. Research carried out, of course, by the Medical Bureau of Road Safety, which I think you mentioned earlier on yourself, Minister, showed that of 1,158 specimens, 58% tested positive for at least one type of drug, and of this, 70% was for cannabis. Since January, of course, 2015, Corla, there's been no mutual recognition of driver disqualifications between Ireland and the UK, and up to December 2014, of course, we had this agreement under the European Convention on Driver Disqualifications, but the UK then opted out of the Convention when it was moved to jurisdiction of the European Court. So while a bilateral agreement was reached on the 30th of October 2015, it couldn't be placed on a statutory footing without legislation. So again, you're to be commended that at long last we've reached this milestone. But it's unfortunate that an impasse of over a year and a half arose. I raised this with your predecessor, of course, many times, and of course now, given the Brexit result, the closing of this loophole may, it's obviously of even greater importance. Just like to ask you, Minister, what's the impact of Section 18 of the bill, I think, which amends Section 38(1) of the 2010 Act? I know that Section 38 hasn't been commenced yet, But when will this important section be commenced, and when will the third payment option be introduced? I know that in the legislative programme, which we got today from the Chief Whip, that the Court's fixed charge notice third payment option and summons printing bill was listed, it was listed for pre-registered scrutiny before the summer recess, and the Whip tells us today, I think, in his report, that it's to be published, I think, before Christmas, and I'd like you to confirm if that's the case, or before the end of this session. So what is its status and the time frame for, again, bringing it to the House? The bill, of course, is listed on the priority legislation for publication, but hopefully this will realistically happen, Minister. And I presume that the minority government, that you've made a collective decision that you will finally, over this coming 12 weeks, seriously start to legislate, because obviously we have lived through a different kind of an era since the general election, but there are so many important pieces of legislation on that programme, and even the bills that haven't been at pre-legislative stage, that we need to see action from this government finally in starting to produce legislation. That amendment, of course, was requested by the Director of Public Prosecutions due to the numbers of persons in court claiming that they hadn't received their fixed charge notices. And some people say that this charade is still going on, that people are still able to claim this, and that nothing or very little can be done, and that offences are then struck out. Minister, if this bill is not passed and enacted, of course, before the road traffic bill itself, how can you ensure that there aren't any further delays in enacting Section 44? Statistics have shown that large numbers of drivers before our courts on penalty point offences such as speeding and holding a mobile phone while driving are avoiding conviction and application of penalty points in court by claiming non-receipt of the FCN. With regard to Section 44, of course, of the 2010 third payment option, we know that there was a disagreement between the Gardaí and the court service in relation to the operation of this due to the inadequate IT systems of both. And the Minister might tell us whether or not those two critical IT systems are now updated, upgraded, whether there has been financial support for this, and whether, in fact, we begin to get the flow of stats that other governments and other RSA-type organisations in other jurisdictions seem to have. It's notable, Minister, of course, the British government has apparently decided to double penalty points from 3 to 6 points for drivers using a mobile phone while driving. Of course, this initiative will mean the loss of a driving licence for learner drivers in the UK who infringe the law in this way. And what's your views on that, Minister? I know there was an increase in that penalty point. In that penalty point category fairly recently. And it's very striking, of course, that the UK authorities, in making this decision, seem to have very detailed information on the serious role of mobile phones used by drivers in causing serious crashes on British roads.
All right, Deputy Broughan, can I interrupt you, and my apologies for that?
Here he comes, when the Minister arrives. I just wanted to ask him just a couple of points in relation to the bill and important issues that are not in the bill. Specifically, first of all, in relation to Section 19, which is the amendment of Section 78A of the Principal Act, the details of motor insurance policy to be provided to ensure the motor insurance industry gives both clarity and full information details to An Garda Síochána on driver insurance policies. Now, I notice the details, Minister, you've included are name and address, the holder, the period of cover, any limitation on the use of the vehicle, the person or class of persons, the vehicle itself, and the names of any driver, the class of driver who's covered under the policy. It's been put to me by the Park Road Safety Organisation that you should have included also the driving licence number of the policyholder and of the named drivers. And given that we hear that because of the appalling increase in insurance and so on, more and more young people are being put on policies as named driver. So I'd ask you to look at Section 19 again, Minister. I also notice intended to commence the amended provisions, which the bill is virtually totally composed, as you know, Cian, and I quote, when the necessary administrative supports have been agreed with the insurance industry and put in place, and it's expected that, and I quote, a more robust and targeted enforcement of uninsured drivers can take place. But, it's very important, obviously, that the full details of the driver and linked to the licence is placed in that section of the legislation. Minister, there is also, I think, a lot of frustration among people who are very committed to road safety that the licence numbers of those disqualified in court are not being accurately recorded and forwarded quickly enough by the courts to the Road Safety Authority within days of conviction, as is the procedure in Northern Ireland. And at present, it seems to take the court service about 3 months to forward this information to the RSA. There's no denying, Minister, that there is a huge problem relating to identify disqualified drivers if they decide to continue to drive. As you know, 96% of drivers disqualified in court are not surrendering their licences to the RSA via the post office box number in Cork, as per data again received by the Park organisation. I just wondered if this is something you could address. Now, I know some of the issues around this, particularly in relation to the court service and enforcement by Garda Síochána, obviously it's the responsibility of your colleague, Minister Francis Fitzgerald, but it does seem to me that these are matters that have to be urgently addressed. You also gave commitment, I think, in one of your first question times, that the department is committed again to the consolidation of the Road Traffic Acts, and it is very striking again how the bill is virtually a series of amendments to 2010 and all the acts going back to 1961. And surely the consolidation, the promised consolidation, must be put out to tender without delay, Ceann Comhairle. Could it not be considered in stages, Minister, given priority perhaps to drink and drug driving, penalty points, driving licence and disqualification? Your predecessor, Minister Donoghue, replied to me a year and a half ago that the work will commence this year. That's in 2015, so you might comment on that in your reply. What's a reasonable amount of time to allow for consolidation? Because the complexity of traffic law is part of the problem, I think, with getting adequate enforcement. Another outstanding problem which has been raised with both departments, the Transport and Justice, is the wording on the summonses for Gardaí to prosecute drivers who fail to present their licence in court. Judge Marie Keane, as you know, dismissed all 21 cases taken by the Gardaí in November last year for this offence due to the wording not appearing on the summons as well. Judge Marie Keane ruled that the summonses were fundamentally flawed because the person who comes before the court is entitled to know the consequences that flow from not having produced their licence. So what have you done, Minister? What has your colleague done, the Minister of Justice, to correct the wording on the summonses so that Gardaí can begin to prosecute again? The 2014 Garda Inspectorate Report Recommendation 2.10, Minister, recommends a system be introduced immediately to ensure that all penalty points are endorsed on driving licences. And a PQ of my own going back to 2013 revealed that only 40% of defendants convicted of penalty points offences had their licence numbers recorded. Although the Inspectorate saw this as an urgent matter in February 2014, a question I raised in April this year reveals that half of those convicted in court on speeding offences over the past 27 months didn't have points applied to their licence. So what solution, Minister, has the Criminal Justice Working Group arrived at, and what's been the contribution of your department in relation to that? In late last year, I was informed by the Taoiseach and the Minister for Justice, Deputy Fitzgerald, that the court service has advised there is no project underway to electronically record the non-production of a licence in court. Yet we know that manual recording of licence numbers is not happening most of the time, and indeed figures supplied to me by way of parliamentary question again showed, in the case of drink driving convictions and disqualifications between January 2013 and March 2015, just 20% of licence holders were recorded, and in the case of speeding convictions, just 42% of licence numbers were recorded. So what's your intention in this regard, Minister? Also, I'd like to ask, in my concluding remarks, what progress has been made on the proposed master licence record project, an initiative, I believe, to link driver licence details with vehicle registration details, which has cost just over €4 million and take 3 years to implement. And I remember asking your predecessor, Minister Donoghue, about that as well. A further issue in the application of road safety laws, of course, is the continuing use of the court poor box for penalty point offences. Just last April, a parliamentary question answer revealed that almost 2,000 drivers avoided points in this way over a 27-month period. And this is despite a High Court judgment by Justice Gerard Hogan in February 2014, which confirmed that Section 55 of the Road Traffic Act 2010 precludes district court judges from allowing offenders to make donations to the poor box to avoid incurring points for road safety offences. So again, I think it's another reason why that the Judicial Council bill should be moved as quickly as possible, and why we should develop. Yeah. So Yeah. So finally, Minister, I understand that an upcoming project will be to furnish the Gardaí with roadside IT devices. Will they be similar to the devices which the PSNI has, which is linked to the accessible central database? And do you also have your officials examining potential use of the new driving licence, which could be used to electronically record penalty points, convictions and disqualifications? So in conclusion, Minister, I welcome the general thrust of the bill here today, and that you've got it before us, and I think it will be another step on the way to making our roads that bit safer. I'd urge you to consider the points I've made about some of the amendments, and obviously the kind of close liaison is one of the difficulties, I think, about road traffic laws, that you have to have this very close interaction with, obviously, the Department of Justice. That a lot of things in this House, we have one department, we have one line department, whereas yourselves in Justice have to liaise, I think, very closely and speak with a united voice. But your responsibility is road safety and Road Safety Authority. So I urge you to follow up on those issues. Thanks, Cian.
Thank you very much.